Your Honor, she was never named. This will is clear. I heard those words and felt my chest tighten like someone had wrapped a fist around my lungs. My brother Devin sat across the aisle, and he was smiling. Not a nervous smile. Not an apologetic one. A slow, satisfied smile that said he had already won and he knew it. Then the judge flipped to page 17, and the entire room went silent. My name is Anna. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a paralegal assistant at a mid-sized law firm in Columbus, Ohio. I spend my days reading legal documents, flagging inconsistencies, and helping attorneys build cases that hold up in court. I understand how the law works. I understand what words on paper can do to a family. And I understand, better than most, that the truth doesn't always walk through the front door. Sometimes you have to go find it yourself. Growing up, I was the quiet one. Not quiet because I had nothing to say, but quiet because no one was really listening. Devin was the one who filled every room he walked into. He was charming and loud and always seemed to know exactly how to make people feel like he was doing them a favor just by showing up. He moved across the country years ago, built a career, wore nice clothes, and called Mom on her birthday. That was enough for most people in our family. That was enough to keep his name shining. I was the one who stayed. When our mother was diagnosed with late-stage breast cancer 2 years before she passed, I gave up my apartment. I moved back home. I drove her to chemotherapy every single week, sometimes twice a week when the treatments were heavy. I managed her medications, I sat with her during the nights when the pain made it impossible to sleep, and I handled every piece of paperwork that came through that front door. Devin sent money a few times. He visited twice. He called regularly, and I understand that has to count for something. But I was the one in that house. I was the one holding her hand when things got hard. I expected grief to bring us together after she passed. I was wrong. It tore everything open instead. I wasn't the celebrated child. I wasn't the loudest one in the room. But working in law every day? I knew things Devin never counted on. And that mattered more than he ever imagined. If you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who sacrificed, the one who showed up quietly while everyone else got the applause, subscribe right now. Drop a comment and tell me your story. You deserve to be seen. Let's go. And stay with me, because what happened next in that courtroom? It changed everything. 3 weeks after we buried our mother, Devin called me. His voice was calm, almost businesslike, and he said he was going to handle the estate. I thought he meant he was helping organize things. I thought we were going to do this together. I was grieving. I was exhausted. And I trusted him, because he was still my brother. What I didn't know was that Devin had already hired a private attorney I had never heard of. While I was still sorting through our mother's clothing and returning the medical equipment from her bedroom, Devin was filing a legal petition. The petition stated one very clear thing, that I was not mentioned in the official will and therefore had no legal claim to the estate. The estate our mother left behind included the family home and a savings account. Together, they added up to $250,000. I didn't get a phone call. I didn't get a text. I got a legal notice in the mail. Cold, formal, printed on letterhead. It told me I had 30 days to respond or I would forfeit all rights. I sat at my kitchen table and read it 3 times. My hands weren't shaking. They were completely still, which somehow felt worse. I called Devin immediately. Devin, I lived with Mom for 2 years. I gave up my apartment. I drove her to chemo every single week. There was a pause on the line, and then he said it. Flat. Final. That was your choice, Anna. The will is what it is. I hung up. And then I did the thing Devin never expected me to do. I pulled up the copy of the will he had submitted to the court and I read every page. I counted them carefully. 16 pages. I stopped breathing for a moment, because I remembered something very clearly. When I had helped my mother organize her legal documents during her final months, I had seen that will. I had held it in my hands. And it was not 16 pages. It was 17. I said nothing to Devon. I closed my laptop. And I started making calls. The days that followed were not easy. Devon wasn't just trying to win a legal case. He was running a strategy, and it had multiple layers. The first move came fast. Devon scheduled a formal meeting with the estate attorney he had hired and gave me the wrong time. Not by a few minutes. By 40 minutes. I arrived at the attorney's office to find the meeting already finished and Devon standing near the front desk with a pen in his hand, finishing paperwork. The attorney glanced at me and looked genuinely uncomfortable, but he said nothing. Devon turned to me with a small shrug and said, "You should have been on time." I looked at him. I said nothing. I turned around and left. The second move came at a small family gathering about a week later. People had come together, cousins and aunts and a few old neighbors, and someone had brought food, and it should have been a quiet moment of shared grief. Instead, Devon worked the room. I watched him moving from group to group, and I caught pieces of conversations. By the end of the evening, an aunt I had always been close to pulled me aside and whispered, with genuine pity in her eyes, "Devon said you've always been jealous of him." I stood there in that kitchen, with the smell of reheated casserole and old dish soap in the air, and I felt something shift inside me. Not break. Shift. Jealous. He told our family I was jealous. That I was making our mother's death about money. That I was making our mother's death about money. That I was the problem. I stayed calm on the outside. Inside, I was burning with a cold, focused fury. The third move was the one that almost broke me. Devon's attorney filed a supplemental court document. In it, they suggested that I had been financially dependent on my mother and may have exerted undue influence over her during her final months. In plain terms, they were calling the caregiver a manipulator. They were suggesting that I had used my proximity to a dying woman to pressure her. I read that document sitting in my car in a parking garage. The engine was off. The garage was nearly empty, and the only sound was the distant echo of a car somewhere on a lower level. I sat there for 10 full minutes before I could move. He didn't just want the money. He wanted to rewrite who I was. And that was the moment I stopped crying. I opened my bag, pulled out my notepad, and I started working. Because I am a paralegal. And I knew exactly what had to happen next. I want you to understand something about the months I spent caring for my mother. We had long conversations during those quiet hours, especially in the evenings when the house settled and the television was off. She was a precise woman. She didn't leave things to chance. She liked knowing that everything was in order, and during those final months, she asked me to help her go through her documents. Her insurance policies, her financial records, her will. I helped her organize everything into labeled folders. And because I worked in law and because I knew how important original documents were, I did something that I didn't even tell her I was doing. I scanned every single page into a secure cloud folder. Every page. Timestamped. Backed up in 2 locations, I had a complete digital copy of my mother's original will. All 17 pages. And I had taken it before Devon ever touched a single document in that house, when I placed the submitted 16-page court version. Side by side with my scanned copy, I didn't need anyone to tell me what I was looking at. The formatting was slightly different. The margins on certain pages were inconsistent in a way that suggested the document had been reconstructed. And page 17 was gone entirely. What they didn't know was, I had seen that will before Devon ever touched it. And the version he submitted to court? It was missing something important. My mother was careful. She loved Devon. But she also knew him. And she made sure to protect me anyway. I just had to prove it. I picked up my phone. I made a call. I said, "I need you to look at something." And I waited. The person I called was Mr. Caldwell. He was an older man, semi-retired, with a small office outside of Columbus that still had actual paper files stacked against the walls. He had drafted my mother's original will 7 years ago. He was the one person who knew that document better than anyone alive, because he had written it himself. Devon had never thought to call Mr. Caldwell. Devon's attorney had filed motions and submitted documents and built an entire legal argument without ever reaching out to the man who created the original will. That was the gap Devon left open without realizing it. Mr. Caldwell agreed to meet me. We sat at a small coffee shop on a Tuesday morning, and the place was quiet enough that I could hear the sound of the espresso machine from across the room. I walked him through everything. I showed him my scanned copy. I showed him the submitted court version. He put on his glasses and looked at both documents carefully, turning pages slowly without saying a word. Then he looked up and said, "The document filed in court is incomplete. Page 17 existed in the original. I drafted it myself." Page 17 was a codicil. A formal legal amendment. My mother had added it 2 years before she passed, during the exact period when I had moved back home to care for her. In that codicil, she specifically granted me the right to the family home and a defined share of the savings account. She had done it deliberately. She had done it quietly. And she had done it without telling Devon. Mr. Caldwell agreed to appear as a witness and to submit his own original drafting records from his personal files. Records that predated anything Devon's attorney had filed. Records that could not be disputed. Meanwhile, Devon was getting comfortable. He started telling family members the case was essentially finished. At a cousin's dinner, someone mentioned the estate situation, and Devon waved his hand like it was already settled. He said, "Some people just don't know when to walk away gracefully." The table laughed. He laughed. He was untouchable, or so he believed. I heard about that dinner secondhand. And I made a decision. I stopped engaging with Devon entirely. No calls. No texts. No responses to the relatives who passed his messages along. I went completely quiet. Devon read my silence as surrender. He thought I had given up. That was exactly what I wanted him to think. The court date arrived on a gray Thursday morning. The room smelled faintly of old wood and paper, that particular courthouse smell that never changes no matter what city you're in. I sat at the respondent's table with my attorney, my folder of scanned documents in front of me, and Mr. Caldwell seated just behind the bar. Devon sat across the aisle in a tailored jacket, arms already folded, posture relaxed. His attorney spoke with the confidence of someone who had never considered the possibility of losing. "Your Honor, she was never named. This will is clear." Devon's attorney presented the 16-page document, walked the judge through it carefully, and argued that the will was complete, valid, and unambiguous. He stated that I had no documented legal claim to any portion of the estate and that my involvement in my mother's final years, while noted, carried no legal standing. Devon sat back in his chair. He glanced at me. That look said it was over. My attorney stood up. She submitted 2 items into evidence without extended commentary. First, my time-stamped cloud backup of the original 17-page will. Second, Mr. Caldwell's original drafting records from his own files, containing the full text of page 17's codicil, dated and signed. The judge received both submissions. He reviewed them. The courtroom went very still. The kind of still where you become aware of every small sound. A chair shifting. Someone clearing their throat. The faint hum of the ventilation system overhead. Then the judge looked up. "Counsel, the document submitted by the petitioner appears to be missing a page. I'm looking at page 17 in the respondent's version. Can someone explain the discrepancy?" Devon's attorney went pale. I watched the color leave his face in real time. Devon leaned forward in his chair. That relaxed, certain posture cracked open like something had snapped underneath it. That was the first time I saw my brother look scared. The judge read the codicil aloud. It named me explicitly as the primary beneficiary of the family home. It granted me 60% of the liquid savings, with Devon receiving the remainder. And embedded in the language of that codicil was a personal note my mother had asked Mr. Caldwell to include. It said that I had sacrificed years of my life and deserved to be protected. She wrote that. She said that. In a legal document. 2 years before she died. Devon leaned toward his attorney and I could see his lips moving. That can't be real. She must have added that herself. His attorney put a firm hand on Devon's arm to silence him. The judge ordered a formal investigation into how page 17 had been omitted from the originally submitted document and whether that omission was accidental or intentional. He was precise and controlled about it, but the weight of what he was saying was unmistakable. I did not celebrate. I sat straight in my chair, hands folded on the table in front of me, and I let the room absorb what had just happened. As we filed out of the courtroom into the hallway, Devon caught up to me. He grabbed my arm. His voice was low and tight. You planned this. I looked at him. I held his gaze without flinching. No, Devon. Mom planned it. I just made sure no one buried it. I kept walking. The estate was re-evaluated under full court supervision. I was awarded the family home and my rightful share of the savings. The total changed my life in a way I'm still getting used to. Not because of what the money can buy, but because of what it represents. It represents my mother's voice, protected. It represents 2 years of my life, acknowledged. The investigation into the missing page was serious. Devon's attorney faced a formal bar complaint. Devon himself was rebuked by the court. There were no criminal charges filed, but his reputation inside our family was permanently changed. The version of Devon that everyone had believed in, the polished, confident man who always seemed to be winning, that version didn't survive the courtroom. Some relatives reached out to me afterward. Quiet apologies, carefully worded messages. I was gracious with each of them. But I didn't rush. I didn't throw open my arms and pretend that what they chose to believe about me during those months hadn't happened. Trust is not rebuilt with an apology alone. It is rebuilt slowly, over time, through consistent action. I gave them the grace of being heard. The rest would take longer. I moved into my mother's home on a Saturday in early spring. I unpacked my things slowly, room by room. The house smelled like her still, in small ways. The linen closet. The hallway near the kitchen. I stood in the living room on my first evening there and looked at the space she had made into a home, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Settled. Grounded. Entirely on my own terms, she knew. She knew exactly what she was doing when she asked me to help her organize those documents. I used to think she just needed an extra set of hands. Now I understand that she trusted me specifically. She trusted me to be careful. She trusted me to pay attention. She trusted me to protect her last words when the moment came that someone tried to erase them. She wasn't just asking me to organize papers. She was trusting me to protect her last words, when no one else would. If a family member ever tried to take what was rightfully yours, especially after you were the one who showed up, the one who drove to the appointments, the one who stayed when staying was hard, I want to hear about it in the comments. These stories matter. Subscribe so they keep reaching the people who need them most. Click hype to help this story find every person who stayed, who sacrificed, and who almost got erased for it. Standing up for yourself is one of the hardest things you can do, and it is even harder when the person across from you shares your last name. If you've been there, you already know. Subscribe and become part of this community, because you shouldn't have to carry that alone. Let me know this story helped by clicking hype. And tell me where you're watching from. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel.